Yeah, so hi, I'm Damian Walker. I have a degree in cognitive science and philosophy from the University of Toronto. Today, I'm going to explore how mixed reality games can help us to develop what I am calling the narrative sense. This relies on an argument of our ability to see the world in terms of stories and to create works of fiction as a sense. Similar to vision or hearing, it allows us to grasp genuine patterns in the world and to orient our behavior meaningfully across time. So I want to focus on developing a rough model for that, and then talk a little bit about how mixed reality games can be used as designer environments to change how we process the information made available through narratives to help promote a sense of meaningful participation in the world. So the field of mixed reality and virtual games is a little bit new to me. I specialized in the study of psychedelics, altered states of consciousness, mysticism and religion, etc. So whenever I go into new territory, it's the philosopher in me that begins, especially trying to figure out the relevance of a particular problem. Why would we be approaching a certain medium? What is it good for? What problems can it solve for us? So that's what I'll be exploring today. So it's no surprise that media technologies change how we think and relate to the world. The invention of alphabetic writing, for example, enabled a number of transformations in cognition, such as the emergence of linear and self-contained narratives, as well as a style of argumentative prose that informed the development of history, philosophy, and science. Since the ancient Greeks refined the linear arc in storytelling through theater and epic poetry, it's shaped the narrative sense of the Western imagination, educating us to expect the rise and fall of action that is characteristic of linear narratives to capture our lives and to carry us along a similar kind of trajectory. But in the new media environment that we find ourselves in, mediated by the internet and digital communications technology, there's been a progressive breakdown of the narrative sense, which has been educated to expect linear narratives, primarily because there's just such an overwhelming amount of information and perspectives available at any time. The ability of linear narratives to guide people's lives has progressively been eroded, leading to a state that media theorist Douglas Rushkoff calls present shock. It's an anxious and emotionally reactive state in which we struggle to find meaningful narratives in which to situate our actions. The reason that I changed the title of this to Maturing the Narrative Sense from Extending the Narrative Sense is because I think that this is an opportunity for us to learn how to develop more accurate and robust cognitive models. Rushkoff, in his book, writes that while stories must follow certain plot conventions in order to make sense to their audience, reality is under no such obligation. Stuff just happens and rarely on schedule. So linear narratives abstract reality to provide us a simplified model of what we can expect in our own lives, but reality isn't really like that. It's much more like a game, interactive, immersive, and open to co-collaboration between multiple participants. So this paper involves mostly setting up the problem, the space of relevance in which to address the problem of present shock. So I'll be going through the following. First, I'll be addressing the predictive processing model in cognitive science, relying on its formulation by Andy Clark to justify treating narrative as a sense. I'll then talk about digital media and present shock in an interwoven fashion with multiverse narratives, which embody and articulate what it's like to live in this digital media environment and expresses some of the features of present shock. And then I will talk about games in mixed reality as designer environments that can help us promote an adaptive response to present shock to help us refine our cognitive models about the world. Oh, spoilers. Okay, first, predictive processing. So the predictive processing model describes conscious perception as arising from neural networks performing a process like statistical inference on signals generated in the body through sensory stimulation. With vision, light stimulates neurons in the eye, passing signals upwards through the hierarchical mesh of the visual cortex. As signals flow in through the mesh, the upper regions of the cortical hierarchy send predictive signals into lower layers and that generate and receive sensory information. This stream of information is called the feedback stream, and it constrains what stimuli do and do not yield changes in perception. Predictive feedback signals aim, in Clark's words, to predict the current sensory barrage, leaving only any unpredicted elements in the form of residual prediction errors to propagate information forward within the system. In our cognitive models, there is a threshold of tolerable uncertainty And as stimuli-generated signals progress through the processing hierarchy, error signals that are judged as unlikely in relation to top-down predictive models are explained away, yielding no change in perception. But if an error cannot be explained away, perhaps because it threatens the plausibility of the model, then that signal is pushed up through the hierarchy of perceptual processing, yielding a change in our models of perception. So of course, what we experience is not the world in and of itself. It's a model of the world filtered through the brain's best guesses about the situations that we find ourselves in. As we exist situated in time, the brain must operate as an anticipation machine that applies learned models of past states to anticipated future states. This means that perception must be tightly coupled to a range of systems that can perform this anticipatory imperative. Clark articulates the predictive brain as coming with a cognitive package deal in which perception, understanding, dreaming, memory, and imagination all emerge as variant expressions of the same underlying mechanistic ploy that meets incoming sensory data with matching top-down predictions. There is, therefore, no perception without a meaningful context in which to situate the objects of perception. Perception is coupled to memory and imagination, which aids us in the orientation and execution of action. In the meaningful orientation of action, stories are never far away. When we see the world around us, we see particular people with whom we fall in love, awe-inspiring natural landscapes that awaken thoughts of God, landmarks that remind us of the horrors of war. The narrative sense is effectively a higher order sense that encircles the physical senses of touch, hearing, taste, etc., imbuing consciousness with temporal significances that extend beyond the information available to the present moment. Just like there is sensory binding in which shape and color are bound by the brain into a single coherent object, the narrative sense acts as a form of temporal binding that helps to situate the present moment into greater scopes of time that we can then express through the telling of myths and stories. Now, as cognition is a package deal involving perception, memory, imagination, etc., perception and hallucination are not entirely dissimilar. They largely overlap in the brain. Clark describes perception as a form of controlled hallucination and hallucination as a form of uncontrolled perception. What distinguishes perception from hallucination is simply whether or not prediction errors coming into the brain through the senses keep our experience in touch with patterns outside of our head. We can therefore qualify narratives as hallucinations if they happen to be out of touch with the patterns in which we're situated in, but they count as perceptions if they help us to get a grip on temporal patterns. Cognitive grip is a term used by advocates of the predictive processing model to articulate what it means for a cognitive agent to be perceiving the world rather than engaged in a dream or hallucination. And stories effectively help us to get a grip on time. This observation inspired the Greek philosopher Aristotle to write in his Poetics that poetry is both more philosophical and more serious than history. For poetry speaks rather of what is universally the case, whereas history speaks of particular events which actually occurred. Aristotle recognized that the fictions expressed in poetry, especially epic poetry or tragic theater, embody and express temporal patterns that apply to many people at many times. He viewed great poets as serious teachers that can inform our expectations about who we are and what might unfold within our lives. Poets give us a kind of prophetic, future-looking vision. So what are the poets of today telling us? Well, narratives surrounding the idea of a multiverse are radiantly alive in the narrative sense of today's artists. We find them at the heart of very popular works like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, The Umbrella Academy, Rick and Morty, and in the immensely popular film Everything Everywhere All at Once. All multiverse narratives assume a many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which in brief is the perspective that anytime there is a probabilistic state of affairs where multiple outcomes are likely, there is a splitting off of the universe into multiple parallel realities in which all of those possibilities actually happened. Popular stories that take place within a many worlds world tend to revolve around a few themes, such as universe-annihilating battles between worlds with conflicting interests, attempts to consolidate all worlds under a single fascist ruler, and themes of existential despair and suicide. A many worlds world is depicted as disorienting, threatening to meaning, morality, and sometimes to existence itself. These patterns, articulated by today's poets, express patterns characteristic of the state that Douglas Rushkoff calls present shock. Present shock is a state of cognitive disorientation characterized by chronic anxiety, emotional reactivity, and paranoid pattern matching conducive to conspiratorial imaginings, which are experiencing an uptick currently. He connects this existential state to the transformations in narrative and media consumption made possible by digital communications technologies. Our digital universe is always on. Everything and everyone intrudes with the urgency of a switchboard-era telephone operator breaking into a phone call with an emergency message from a relative. All these interruptions, more than simply depleting our cognitive abilities, create the sense that we need to keep up with their impossible pace lest we lose touch with the present. An omnipresent media environment that updates us faster than our brains can operate while demanding we always react now has left us narratively impaired, at least in relation to how we have been educated to expect narratives thus far. With so many alternative perspectives and events available at any moment, finding a single orienting trajectory in the ocean of information can be difficult. The resultant psychological situation mirrors the world situation in popular multiverse narratives. Social media has been observed to contribute to increased political polarization. Differences in opinion can now be seen as threatening morally and physically, and confrontation with the sheer multiplicity of possibility can be overwhelming, provoking existential dread. The internet-mediated world is much like the many worlds world depicted in the film Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, which is threatened by a nihilistic crisis. The antagonist creates a universe-annihilating black hole by putting everything in the multiverse on a bagel. When everything is concentrated into this single point, it becomes a vast nothing that threatens to consume the universe. The antagonist relates to this black hole as to suicide. Her desire is to die, to put an end to the madness of existence once and for all. The themes and the articulation of the multiverse in this piece of media mirror what is depicted by Bo Burnham in his famous Netflix series Inside Out, in which his song about the internet describes this technology. He personifies it by saying, by having it ask us, can I give you everything all of the time? Neither of these pieces of media depict us as a particularly happy state of affairs. They are worlds in which a million mental states are available to us simultaneously without any cohesive meaning connecting them. Rushkoff writes very similarly about the condition of present shock. He says that when the social now is relegated to the multitasking digital environment, we may expect the results of what we have been witnessing: teen suicide, depression, higher stress, and a greater sense of disconnection. The themes of overwhelm, despair, madness, and suicide in Everything, Everywhere, All at Once and other multiverse media is an expression of what it feels like to live in a digitally mediated social now. Now, of course, as I mentioned, the linear narrative is a little bit unlike the world of everyday experience, which is interactive, requires improvisation in the face of unexpected encounters, and can change depending on how multiple agents co-create the world. Therefore, Rushkoff is right to observe that games offer a healthier, or at least more active, response to the collapse of narrativity confounding much of the rest of popular culture. Instead of panicking at the death of the story, players become the story and delight in acting it out in real time. In the current trend towards immersive and interactive theater, there lies an opportunity to mature the narrative sense and to bring peace to the anxious age of present shock. Virtual and mixed reality offer different opportunities in this project, but I believe that mixed reality has unique advantages in providing a robust solution to present shock. So we can look at especially location-based mixed reality in terms of designer environments. While the predictive processing model applies to all cognitive life forms, for Clark, human beings are unique in our ability for temporally coordinated social action and our ability to construct artifacts and designer environments. By coming together in shared social practice, we create environments that change the patterns of sensory feedback naturally available to our senses, including the narrative sense. Clark identifies educational institutions and talks about that most thoroughly, but he also points to structured play as a designer environment that can help us to build and rebuild the generative models that inform each agent's repertoire for perception, action, and reason. He describes technologies of media and communication as designer inputs that can augment and change the flow of information through our cortical hierarchies, very similar to Marshall McLuhan's idea that different media technologies change the ratio of the senses and thereby change how we relate and access to the world. Location-based mixed reality offers a profound opportunity to develop institutions that change how we process information and offer a powerful avenue for restoring the narrative sense. So the images that I've used here are from a company called Meow Wolf, based in the United States. They have locations in Santa Fe, Denver, and Las Vegas. And I really like how their approach is very locally focused. Virtual reality as a technology is very easy to mass distribute. Anybody with a headset can access it. But from an infrastructural standpoint, I think that location-based mixed reality has advantages in terms of bringing communities together. Recall that there is a culture of antagonism aggravated by the particular ways in which social media algorithms have coordinated our behavior. And especially in places like North America, there's a strong amount of polarization between different political spheres. So yeah, I'll just jump to how each of a few of Meow Wolf's locations respond to multiverse anxieties to show how they provide a sort of local focus, which is what I'm really trying to emphasize here. So their installations tend to deal with multiverse anxieties, but in their Las Vegas location, for example, it deals with those in terms of commercialization of cosmic catastrophe, whereas at the Denver location, it deals with themes of fascism and multiculturalism. Yeah, so I could say more, but I don't want to run too much over time. So I can leave it at there.
Much, Damian, that was great, really interesting.